Alright, hey guys, how you all doing? Shadow of the Erdtree has really lived up to the hype, in my opinion. I'm going to cover some spoilers in this video, so it's not going to be entirely spoiler-free, so if you're still working your way through the DLC, this would not be a great video to watch. So, first things first, I'm going to talk about what you're seeing here. This is my Celian Onryu character, so kind of like this Celian spirit that invades people, using like magic stuff. I've made it a little bit more dex oriented because I got the Curse Blade mask, and it looks kind of more like the depictions from like Japanese lore of like what these like spirits, these like dark spirits that haunt people are supposed to look like. And I wanted to look a little bit more messed up instead of like more armored, kind of like the old look of it had. I've also been like using the Odachi with this. I guess it's called the Great Katana, but we all know it's the Odachi. And I don't know. I think I like this weapon, but I'm also a little bit like bored by it because really all it does particularly well is running attacks. Like the poking attacks are really good, but it's kind of just turned into like a poking machine for me, and it just feels like I'm using a like less good halberd. I think it's very fun for Glintstone Pebble. I like Glintstone Pebble a lot because you can kind of like send out these baits where you're just like firing Pebble at other folks, and then once they try to close that distance, you can land the follow-up, and the follow-up is like really what does a lot of damage. The Pebble doesn't do bad damage either itself, but the follow-up is where it's at. But yeah, the Odachi like was a pretty fun weapon for most of this, but I kind of don't love it because the mix-up potential for running attacks in R2s are just not there. Like, it has one good running attack, and that running attack is like pretty damn good. But the R2s on the Odachi seem to be just like I can't hit anything with them. I keep trying to, and they just are like just a touch too slow in places where like greatswords and curved greatswords are just dramatically faster, which you wouldn't really expect considering that this is like a lighter weapon than both of those like classes in general, but that's just kind of the nature of things. Yeah, it's kind of an R1 machine. The R1s like are pretty decent. Actually, the R1 chain, especially two-handed, is good, especially because of the second R1 is a follow-up poke. If you do a running attack and then immediately press R1, that's the poke. If you do a rolling attack, which is like a crouch poke, then the follow-up after that is also a poke. So it's very good at that, but just like the horizontal range on the weapon, or the horizontal like coverage, I guess, I don't love. So I'm trying to like mix up like what I'm doing with my offhand to try to compensate for that. And there's a couple of like really good katanas in the DLC to use. I've been really liking the Starline sword. I think when people first found the Starline sword, I like saw someone have this like really dramatic reaction to it, where they were like, "Oh my god, they put another laser katana in the game," and it's like this is not like Moonveil at all. Like Moonveil's problem is that it's like very hard to react to and has this massive range, and up until very recently, it had just ridiculous damage. The Starline sword, on the other hand, is all about like this chain of attacks that you do. It's like this chain of 3 attacks, which first one starts off pretty quick, but doesn't do a ton of damage. The second one like does more damage, but has this big delay in between like attacks 1 and 2. And then the last one does a crap load of damage and is like pretty hard to react to. But like you have to get hit by the first 2. And it's actually very easy to not get hit by the second one because you just have to roll sideways. In fact, it would be very easy to not get hit by like the second and third chain if you just roll sideways. The whole thing just like carries you forward, and all of my opponents just like roll backwards when they're getting hit by this weapon. So again, if you're facing someone with the Starline sword, just roll to the side. Stop rolling directly backwards, because that's going to lock you into this chain that likely will kill you at the end of the day. Especially because like it just gets more and more powerful as it gets going, especially if it stacks like the winged sword effects, if you have any talismans or like crystal tears that do that. But if you're gonna add like a laser katana to the game, like this is a good way to do it. It's like a pretty decent weapon that isn't stupidly overpowered and doesn't break the balance and spacing of the game. I like using it as like a sort of execution weapon, where I've killed almost everyone else in this invasion, so now I'm gonna kill you in the flashiest way possible. I think maybe too many of the invasions that I've gathered here involve me just like killing the Phantom with a poke or a running poke from the Odachi, and then I'll go on to teach the host the lesson that a lot of the bosses in Shadow of the Erdtree teach you, which is don't just panic roll backwards. Like, panic rolling backwards will get you killed. You gotta like try to react to like this moveset and maybe roll inwards or roll to the side and do something other than just like panic roll backwards. I've also been using the Sword of Night, which is more of a pure dex weapon, which actually works fine on this build because I have like 30 dex. It's not a lot, but it's also like you get some decent damage out of it. Honestly, if you're watching this video, like, you know what the deal is with the Sword of Night. The only things I have to add to it are that, like, if anyone wants to like turtle up, the Sword of Night is unblockable, so it just cuts right through their shield. And another thing, because the Sword of Night is so dark and edgy, you can't see it very well at night or in caves, so I try to use it then, just as like it's a very small tactical advantage that I find very funny. I'm also not doing the true combo here, because I just didn't know about it at the time. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to preface, like, that's what you're seeing right now, a bunch of invasions with the Odachi on a rune level 81 build. So now I'd like to talk about level ranges. I've been doing all these invasions at rune level 81, which, by the way, highly would not recommend doing that right now. I think as time goes by, mid-levels is going to get better, but right now invasions are rough at mid-levels because it's all like people who've already played through the DLC, have DLC weapons, and then are like getting their buddy who have not played the DLC at all and are like, alright, let's get you through the base game so we can play the DLC together. So it's all like dramatically over-leveled Phantoms carrying not very good hosts through the game. And that's not a lot of fun for me to invade because the hosts die super easy, but that's like not what I'm here for. Like, I want to fight multiple people in a slightly prolonged engagement, not just like murder your host and then like do a funny gesture at you. I do that sometimes, but like that gets old pretty quickly for me. That's not quite what I'm looking for. On the other hand, though, like, I did my first playthrough on a rune level 150 character, and I hate invasions at rune level 150. It's just not fun in the slightest unless you're doing like spellcasting stuff. And even if you're doing spellcasting stuff, like, you gotta be doing stuff from like a couple very particular classes, otherwise you're just screwed. I was trying to make like a magma mage work at rune level 150 for some stupid reason, and the magma sorceries just aren't doing it. Like, they're just too slow, and they do like pretty good damage, but they're pretty easy to dodge. So it just wasn't working out, and it was only like when I like switched to was it Renala's twin swords and just like went ham on the Ash of War and just started winning invasions that way, and I was like, oh, okay, this is real dumb. Maybe I'm oversimplifying rune level 150 invasions, but it seems like if you don't have a move, whether it's like an Ash of War or a spell that can just like wipe people out, you're gonna get wiped out yourself by like 3 people all doing the same thing, or like all doing slightly different things that like frame traps you, right? So I just find it kind of not very fun to play. I'm still gonna make like a 168 character that's gonna be, as of right now, some sort of Arc Faith Dragon caster. And my goal with that is pretty much just to do exactly what I said. Do some absurd move that like annihilates hosts or phantoms and like call it a day with that. But back to level ranges, right? So I did my first playthrough at rune level 150, and then I did my second playthrough at rune level 81. And the purpose behind that was to kind of see, like, okay, what happens when I take some of my mid-level characters into the DLC that's supposed to be at this much higher level? And I was actually super pleasantly surprised that the Erdtree fragment leveling system works really well for mid-level characters. Like, I feel very, very comfy at rune level 81 taking my character through that build. Like, I fought, was it Meteor Mother of Fingers, which is not a It's not an easy boss, but it's not particularly hard either. But I fought Meteor with like around 12 Scadutree fragments and like had a pretty good time doing that. And I was impressed because I was really expecting to get curb stomped like I do when I bring like rune level 81 characters up to like the Erdtree. But I was just super pleasantly surprised that you can kind of take these mid-level characters and have like normal playthroughs of the game with the Scadutree leveling system. It's actually kind of genius. I don't know if I love it, and I think I'm going to get tired of it pretty soon because like you kind of just run around collecting fragments, and it just kind of feels like grocery shopping at a certain point. But I love that you can just take characters that aren't at 150. Like they don't have to be endgame for Elden Ring's endgame to play through the DLC in an enjoyable way. So that was a great experience. I'm gonna try and push it a little bit and see how low I can go, but I also just have so much time to do that. I'm currently doing a rune level 94 build just because there's a build in mind that I have that I like am very excited about. But there's just so much time. Like who knows when FromSoft's next game is gonna come out. We might be stuck with this for like 4 or 5 years. So I got plenty of time to work on these builds. I'm trying not to rush it right now. I do have some just general thoughts on the DLC. Shadow of the Erdtree was kind of what I was hoping the base game of Elden Ring was gonna actually be like. My first playthrough of the base game of Elden Ring was like one of my favorite experiences ever, but it also got very frustrating when I kind of realized that like there's certain gates throughout the game that you like have to go through, and that got very frustrating to me because I'm like, I don't mind that in past Souls games because they're pretty straightforward. I do mind that in an open world game where like the whole draw is the open world. So like why are you gating my progression in general through these like very specific bosses? What I mean by that is like in order to get to the whole like latter half of the game, you have to beat Morgott. Like you absolutely have to. In order to get to Farum Azula, which I think is like an incredible level, you have to beat the Fire Giant, which is one of my least favorite bosses in Elden Ring, period. In order to get to the Erdtree, you have to fight Commander Nile, which just isn't that fun of a fight either. So it's just kind of annoying the ways in which it does that. Meanwhile, in Shadow of the Erdtree, you can pretty much go wherever you want, like from the jump. You really don't have to fight like one particular boss in order to unlock a latter half of the game. You can kind of just go there right from the beginning. In my experience, I discovered the Cerulean Coast pretty late into my first playthrough, but on my second playthrough, I found the Cerulean, like I found a way to the Cerulean Coast before I even went to like Scadu Altus. Like that was the second area I went to practically, and I was blown away. I was like, cool, this is like, there's a path here. There's a way to get here from the very beginning, and that just unlocks so much more for me for each playthrough. What's very frustrating for me about like playing these games over and over again, especially like the older Dark Souls games, but also Elden Ring's base game, is that like you have to kind of like pick a weapon that you're going to be using for a little while, and then only after defeating several bosses can you get to the weapon that you really want to do the rest of your playthrough on, right? Shadow of the Erdtree, you can just go there, fight whatever thing that drops it with whatever weapon you have at the moment, and then you can kind of start like your new Shadow of the Erdtree playthrough from there. It's really great. I really love that aspect of things. And I'm hoping that like in the future, if we get like more Elden Rings, which I think is very, very possible, and not just possible, I think it's incredibly likely. But in the future, if we get these sorts of things, like I'm hoping they follow this format more than they followed like the base game of Elden Ring's format, which is just like giant sprawling open world, versus Shadow of the Erdtree's like far more interconnected open world that you can like go and rush certain things early to try to get certain pieces of gear that make your playthrough significantly different from other playthroughs. As for lore, because I don't talk about that much lore on this channel, but I do really have an appreciation for it. This is a FromSoft DLC, Like, I don't know what some of y'all were expecting in terms of, like, answers. People were really upset that we didn't get an answer on the Glowmide Queen, which... First of all, you should never go into a FromSoft DLC, like, expecting answers on the burning questions that you have. Like, they will answer some questions from the base game, maybe some questions that you didn't even know that you had, like the whole, like, Melania whispering in Radahn's ear thing. Didn't expect that to ever really get answered. That was cool. That was also, like, not a burning question that I had, but it's cool that they filled in the gap. Stuff like the Glowmide Queen, I don't think they're really ever going to answer that. And I think there are some answers hidden in the base game that are left purposely super ambiguous and were, like, never really going to be answered. I just recall people being, like, super disappointed in Dark Souls 3's DLC because they're, like, so bought in that they were going to Londor. And then when we didn't go to Londor, we went somewhere else that had, like, a lot of really rich lore anyways. People were super disappointed. They're like, oh, I needed to know who Velka was. No, you fucking don't. You don't need to know who Velka is. There's even an NPC named Sir Wilhelm in Dark Souls 3 who, like, kind of mocks you as the player character for, like, needing answers to every single thing. Like, I think it's like, every running man must be taught is the line that he uses. Anyways. The one thing I didn't love was the final boss. Nobody seems to really love the final boss with the DLC. I have no motivation to beat it. Like, nothing that he drops I really want. And I don't think the fight itself is, like, a very fun fight in that regard. Now, people are really upset about the lore as well, which I find, like, the least objectionable. I think the lore of, like, bringing somebody back that was killed in the overworld back to, like, the Shadow Tree world or whatever is kind of compelling. The only thing I take issue with is that, like, part of the lore is that, like, Miquella wanted Radahn to be his consort because Radahn was very kind and also very strong. And, like, yeah, we know Radahn's very strong. I really don't buy that Radahn is very kind. Like, Radahn's two favorite people in the world, which he was, like, totally obsessed with, were, like, two completely genocidal maniacs. Like, Godfrey, who murdered all the giants, likely murdered a fuckload of dragons just because he likes fighting. Like, that's kind of a cool, like... That's kind of a badass character, but is not a kind person whatsoever. And his other one is, Radahn, who, you know, is also America, who's also a genocidal maniac, who, as we now know, has, like, carried out multiple genocides. And also, like, Radahn is kind of like a sad sack to me. Like, I have a lot of contempt in my heart for Radahn. For one, because he, like, hates his red hair because it reminds him of the Giants, which is just so fucking pathetic. Like, he's just full of self-loathing, and he's also the world's biggest, like, Golden Order simp, to the point where, like, after America shatters the Elden Ring, he tries to put it back together. Like, that's pathetic, dude. Get a life. And, you know, I'm not a big fan of any of the Golden Order simps, except Goldmask. It was fucking awesome. But, yeah, I just, not a big fan of Radahn. I really hate Radahn, if I'm going to be honest. And because Radahn is so obsessed with him, he, like, fanboys over his own dad / mother. I think Radahn's fucking corny as shit. And I'm glad he got Scarlet Aeonia'd. And it's actually a little bit too bad that they, like, this is actually the like, how Radahn's story ends. Because I think it's, like, the perfect karmic justice that, like, the man who held up the stars, like, held up the flow of the universe, like, his fate was to stagnate and rot for, like, countless years until we got there, which is just, like, a classic trope that we've seen in a lot of these games that I know is based on, like, actual, like, Buddhist philosophy, which is that, like, trying to, like, stagnating the world ends in rot, and that's exactly Radahn's fate. So it kind of, like, undoes that for me because he, like, we killed him, and then he has this other glorious ending with Miquella. Whatever. I'm very meh about it. It's unfortunate that that's the ending to, like, what I thought was a really, really compelling DLC story-wise. But I'm judging this thing on, like, the overall merit of, like, this whole expansion, which was incredible. And there's so much more to do. Oh, I should also point out, if you were one of these people who was, like, upset that, like, this ending made Radahn gay, like, Good. I hope you're really upset. I hope you enjoy having piss and shit in your pants, you fucking little crybaby. And if you're still here somehow, and you want to argue with me about that in the comments, go fuck yourself. I'm not doing that. Get the fuck off my channel. You want to like share your lore theory that like maybe Radahn was like charmed into this? Sure. Yeah, I'll discuss lore in good faith. But if you want to take issue with like the sexuality of a character because that makes you uncomfortable, get the fuck off my channel. I don't need you here. I don't really want to engage with you. But yeah, on that happy note, I am super excited to do a billion more playthroughs of this game. And I have a couple builds cooking that I think are going to be like actually dramatically different than just the Celian Onryo with like an Odachi instead of a curved greatsword. So yeah. Really looking forward to playing this game some more, and I think most of all looking forward to like what other people do with these new tools and abilities. So yeah, that's all from me guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.